Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to explore a heartwarming story about a powerful CEO who leaves his busy corporate world behind to follow the woman he loves into a quiet bamboo forest, and struggles hilariously while learning to harvest bamboo shoots just to stay by her side. What could make a successful CEO trade boardrooms for muddy fields? Stay with us to find out, and if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next videos. Morning came quietly to the small wooden house hidden deep in the bamboo forest. The air was cool, filled with the faint rustling of tall bamboo swaying gently in the breeze. Inside the house, Tu Diep was already awake. She moved softly around the kitchen, tying her hair back before picking up a woven bamboo basket and a small knife she always used when she went into the forest. James noticed the movement as he stepped out from the bedroom, still adjusting the sleeves of his shirt. He leaned against the wooden door frame, watching her with curious eyes. "Where are you going so early?" he asked. Tu Diep glanced up and smiled slightly. "I'm going to the bamboo grove behind the hill. The wild bamboo shoots should be ready today." James frowned a little. "Bamboo shoots?" She lifted the basket to show him. "Yes. I pick them and bring them to the town market. People like fresh bamboo shoots. They sell well." James crossed his arms and watched her for a moment. In the past, his mornings used to begin with board meetings, financial reports, and endless calls from executives. Now he was standing in a wooden house surrounded by bamboo, watching the woman he loved prepare to go harvest vegetables from the forest. Without hesitation, he said, "I'll come with you." Tu Diep blinked in surprise, then burst into a soft laugh. "You?" she teased. "The CEO of a big company wants to go dig bamboo shoots?" James raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong with that?" Tu Diep shook her head while smiling. "Have you ever even seen a bamboo shoot before?" James straightened his back confidently. "How hard can it be?" She studied him for a moment, clearly amused. "All right then, but don't complain later." A short while later, the two of them walked along a narrow dirt path leading deeper into the bamboo forest. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall green stalks, creating soft patterns on the ground. Birds chirped somewhere above them, and the air smelled fresh and earthy. Tu Diep moved naturally through the forest, her eyes scanning the ground carefully. James followed behind, stepping over roots and fallen leaves. It felt strangely peaceful compared to the fast-paced world he used to live in. After a few minutes, Tu Diep suddenly stopped. "There," she said quietly. James looked down but saw nothing but soil and scattered leaves. "Where?" She crouched down and brushed away a thin layer of dirt. A small pointed shoot was pushing through the ground. "That's a young bamboo shoot," she explained. "The good ones grow just under the surface." James leaned closer, intrigued. "So what do we do?" Tu Diep pulled out her small knife and demonstrated. "You have to cut it at the right angle," she said. "If you cut too high, you waste the tender part. If you cut too deep, you damage the root and it won't grow again." She carefully sliced the base of the shoot and lifted it smoothly from the soil. The bamboo shoot looked fresh and pale. James nodded, impressed. "That looks easy." Tu Diep gave him a playful look. "All right, CEO, your turn." James stepped forward confidently. He scanned the ground and quickly spotted another shoot. "There's one." He knelt down and pulled out the knife Tu Diep had handed him. "Just like you showed me," he said. But the moment he tried to cut the shoot, the knife slipped sideways. "Wait!" The blade scraped against a small stone hidden in the soil. James lost his balance slightly and nearly tipped the basket over. Tu Diep burst into laughter. "Careful," she said. "You almost lost our harvest." James cleared his throat and tried to regain his dignity. That was just a warm-up. He tried again with another shoot. This time he pressed too hard into the ground. The knife struck a rock beneath the soil. "Seriously?" he muttered. Tu Diep folded her arms, watching him with amusement. "Maybe the forest doesn't recognize CEOs," she teased. James ignored the comment and continued digging stubbornly. Finally, he managed to cut a shoot free, but when he pulled it out, the bamboo snapped in half. He stared at the broken piece in his hand. Tu Diep walked over and looked at it. "You broke it," she said. James sighed. "This is harder than negotiating $1 billion contract." Tu Diep laughed again. "CEO of a big company," she said playfully, "but terrible at farming." James wiped a bit of dirt from his sleeve, only to realize his once clean shirt was now covered in mud. He looked down at himself. "Great," he said. "I used to attend meetings in suits worth thousands of dollars. Now look at me." Tu Diep grinned. "You're improving." James shook his head but smiled. Despite the awkwardness, he refused to give up. He crouched down again and searched carefully this time. His hands were already a little sore from digging through the soil, but he kept going. After a moment, Tu Diep noticed his determined expression. "James," she said softly, "you don't have to do this." He paused and looked up at her. "What do you mean?" "You're not used to this kind of work," she said gently. "You don't need to force yourself." James stayed quiet for a moment. Then he slowly stood up and faced her. "Tu Diep," he said calmly, "I used to run a huge company." She nodded. "I know." There were hundreds of employees, investors, endless responsibilities. He glanced around the peaceful bamboo forest. But none of that feels as important as this. Tu Diep looked at him, confused. James continued, his voice softer now. "Being here with you." The forest grew quiet around them. James picked up the knife again and knelt down. "If you can build a life here," he said while carefully brushing away dirt, "then I can learn how to live here too." His hands were slower now, more careful. "I'm not afraid of getting dirty," he added with a faint smile. Tu Diep watched him silently. James positioned the knife just like she had shown him earlier. He took a deep breath and sliced at the base of the shoot. This time, the blade moved smoothly through the soil. He gently lifted the bamboo shoot from the ground. For a moment, he stared at it, surprised. Then his eyes lit up. "Hey!" He held it up proudly. "I did it!" Tu Diep couldn't help laughing again. "Congratulations, CEO James," she said warmly. "You just harvested your first bamboo shoot." James looked at the small shoot in his hand like it was a trophy. "I feel ridiculously proud right now," he admitted. Tu Diep placed the shoot into the basket. "Careful," she said. "At this rate, we might actually fill the basket before sunset." James smirked. "Oh, now you have faith in me?" Tu Diep smiled. "A little." They continued working side by side in the bamboo forest, the quiet morning slowly turning into something warm and peaceful as the basket gradually began to fill. The basket slowly grew heavier as the morning passed. One bamboo shoot after another disappeared into the woven basket hanging from Tu Diep's arm. James, however, was still adjusting to the rhythm of the forest. At first, every movement felt unfamiliar. The ground was uneven, roots twisted under the soil, and the bamboo shoots seemed to hide themselves just when he thought he had spotted one. Tu Diep crouched nearby and carefully brushed the soil aside with practiced hands. "Look closely," she said gently. "You can usually tell where a bamboo shoot is about to grow. See that little crack in the soil?" James leaned closer. "Oh, I see it now." "Exactly," she replied. "The young ones push the soil up a little. That's where you dig." James nodded seriously like a student in an important lesson. "All right," he said. "Round 2. He knelt down again and followed her instructions step by step. This time he was much more careful. He cleared the dirt slowly, placed the knife at the right angle, and cut. The shoot slid out smoothly. James blinked. "Wait, that actually worked." Tu Diep looked over and smiled. "See? You're learning." James lifted the bamboo shoot and examined it proudly. "I think I've discovered a new career." Tu Diep laughed. "A CEO who quits his company to become a bamboo farmer?" "Why not?" James said casually. "Seems less stressful." She shook her head but couldn't hide her smile. The forest felt calm around them. The tall bamboo stalks swayed quietly, and sunlight filtered through the leaves in soft golden streaks. For the first time in a long while, James felt something he hadn't felt during years of corporate life. Peace. Back then, his days had been filled with pressure. Meetings, negotiations, decisions worth millions. Every mistake carried consequences. But here, the biggest challenge was digging a bamboo shoot out of the ground. And strangely, he liked it. They worked for a while longer until the basket was finally full. Tu Diep stretched her arms and sighed softly. That should be enough for today. James wiped sweat from his forehead. I didn't think harvesting vegetables would be this exhausting. You're not harvesting vegetables, Tu Diep corrected him with a playful tone. You're harvesting bamboo shoots. Right, he said with a small laugh. Important distinction. They carried the basket together to a small open space beneath the bamboo grove. Tu Diep sat down on a smooth rock and placed the basket between them. James dropped down beside her, breathing out slowly. Okay, I officially respect farmers now. Tu Diep tilted her head slightly. Only now? James chuckled. In my old life, everything revolved around money, business strategies, and numbers. I thought success meant building bigger companies and earning more profits. He picked up one of the bamboo shoots and turned it in his hands. But this, he said quietly, this feels different. Tu Diep looked at him curiously. What do you mean? James leaned back slightly, resting his arms behind him. Back then, every day felt like a race. There was always another deal, another competitor, another problem to solve. He looked up at the tall bamboo swaying above them. But here, things moved slower. Tu Diep listened quietly. James turned his head and looked at her. And honestly, he added softly, I like it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. A gentle breeze moved through the bamboo forest, making the leaves whisper above their heads. Tu Diep finally smiled. You know, she said, when I first came to this forest, I thought I had lost everything. James frowned slightly. Lost everything? She nodded. My past, my family, the life I thought I was supposed to have. She glanced down at her hands. But after a while, I realized something. James waited. This place didn't take things away from me, she said quietly. It gave me a chance to start again. James studied her expression. And now? He asked. Tu Diep looked up at him. Now I think that chance was worth it. James smiled softly. He reached over and gently took her hand. Before I met you, he said, I thought success meant having more money than everyone else. Tu Diep squeezed his hand lightly. And now? She asked. James shrugged with a small laugh. Now I think success is waking up every morning and seeing you standing in the kitchen with that basket. Tu Diep laughed quietly. That's a very simple definition of success. Exactly, James said. Simple is good. They sat there for a while, enjoying the peaceful quiet of the forest. Eventually, Tu Diep stood up and picked up the basket again. We should head back before it gets too late, she said. The market opens early tomorrow. James stood up beside her. I'll carry it. Tu Diep raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? It's heavy. James lifted the basket confidently. I'm stronger than I look. The moment he said it, the weight of the bamboo shoots nearly pulled his arm down. Tu Diep burst into laughter. Careful, Mr. Farmer. James adjusted his grip and shook his head. I refuse to be defeated by vegetables. They're not vegetables, Tu Diep corrected again. Bamboo shoots, James sighed. Right. They began walking back along the narrow path toward the wooden house hidden among the trees. The afternoon light had grown softer, and the forest seemed even quieter now. As they walked, Tu Diep glanced at James. You know, she said gently, you don't have to become a farmer for me. James looked at her. What do you mean? You've already built an amazing life, she said. You don't need to change everything just because of me. James stopped walking. Tu Diep turned back toward him. He looked at her for a moment before speaking. "I'm not doing this because I have to," he said. "Then why?" she asked softly. James stepped closer. "I'm doing it because I want to." He smiled warmly. "I'm not trying to become a farmer." Tu Diep looked puzzled. "Then what are you trying to become?" James gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "I'm learning how to build a life with you." Tu Diep's eyes softened. For a moment, the world around them seemed to disappear, leaving only the quiet bamboo forest and the two of them standing there. Then Tu Diep smiled, a quiet, happy smile. "All right," she said. James lifted the basket again. "Let's go home." Side by side, they continued walking along the forest path toward the small wooden house waiting for them in the distance. James, once a powerful CEO used to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions, begins a completely different chapter of life after choosing to stay with Tu Diep in her quiet bamboo forest home. One peaceful morning, Tu Diep goes into the forest to harvest bamboo shoots to sell at the town market, and James insists on joining her. Confident at first, he quickly discovers that digging bamboo shoots is far harder than running a company. He slips, breaks shoots, and gets covered in mud, while Tu Diep laughs at his clumsy attempts. Yet James refuses to give up. Determined to share her life, he patiently learns each step until he finally harvests his first perfect bamboo shoot. As they rest together beneath the bamboo trees, James realizes something important. Success is no longer about wealth or power, but about building a simple, peaceful life beside the woman he loves.